shock. Pope Leo XIV decides to oust Cardinal Tagle just for this reason. Vatican stunned. The bells of St. Peter's Basilica rang early that morning, but this time not for celebration. Inside the ancient walls of the Apostolic Palace, behind doors that few men in history have ever crossed, a decision was made, one that would shake the very foundations of the Catholic Church. Pope Leo XIV, the man once hailed as the unifier of the fractured church, the shepherd who would guide the flock through turbulent waters, had chosen a path few dared imagine. With a single decree, he initiated the removal of Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, a cardinal beloved by millions, a figure seen by many as the very future of the Church itself. Whispers filled the Vatican corridors, even before. The ink had dried on the official documents. Seasoned Vatican journalists clutched their rosaries in disbelief, stunned not only by the act itself, but by the hidden reason behind it. What secret could possibly drive the Vicar of Christ to turn against one of his most trusted cardinals? What private counsel? What unseen pressure? What divine or political storm had reached the Holy Father's chamber that night? For years, Cardinal Tagle stood like a beacon of hope, a man of compassion, humility, and deep theological insight. To many faithful across Asia and beyond, he represented the gentle face of the modern Church. His voice carried not only in synods and councils, but in the silent prayers of the broken, the poor, the forgotten. And yet, Pope Leo XIV, once thought to be his great ally, had called him in, alone, without his staff, without advisors. Just the two men, face to face, beneath the looming crucifix of Christ crucified. Sources close to the event describe a heavy silence in that meeting. No shouts, no arguments, only the quiet weight of eternity pressing upon them. At the stroke of midnight, as the Swiss Guard stood post beneath the marble statues of the saints, the order was finalized. A Vatican official who spoke under strict anonymity whispered words that have since rippled across the world. It was not a matter of doctrine. It was a matter of loyalty. But loyalty to whom? To what? Was it a betrayal of heavenly mandates or of earthly alliances? Some speculate that factions within the College of Cardinals had grown restless, that there were secret fears Cardinal Tagle's growing popularity might challenge old structures, tip balances of power, or awaken ambitions that certain powerful figures had fought long to suppress. Others suggest darker whispers of confidential reports, outside influences, of dossiers delivered late at night by unseen hands, and yet many of the faithful refuse to believe it. How could Pope Leo XIV, the man who allowed Tagle to place the ring of the fisherman on his own hand during his inauguration, now turn and strip him of his authority? Was this a test, a purging, a necessary sacrifice for the unity of the Church? Or was something far deeper unfolding in the hidden chambers of Rome? The faithful across the world wept in confusion. Pilgrims at St. Peter's knelt before the Pietà, lighting candles as tears fell upon marble floors. Catholic social media exploded in prayer chains. Theologians debated late into the night. Prophets and mystics across the world began to speak in whispers of ancient warnings, of a church divided, of secrets long hidden under Vatican vaults, of the time when the shepherd would be struck and the sheep scattered. Yet officially, the Holy See remains silent. In public, Pope Leo XIV still speaks of unity, of renewal, of cleansing the Church for a new era. But behind those walls, some say, the true battle for the soul of the Church has already begun. Could this be the fulfillment of the Third Secret of Fatima, long debated by scholars and concealed by officials? Could this unprecedented move be the first of many purifications before the final hour approaches? Or is it but the first drop before a coming storm? Even now, the marble statues that line the Vatican halls seem to watch in solemn silence. What? Unseen forces moved the hand of the Pope? What sin or sacrifice lies beneath this dramatic ousting? And most importantly, Is this the hand of man or the hand of heaven? The world watches. The Church trembles. The hour is later than we think. The Vatican that morning was unusually still, but in the air lingered a heaviness, as if the angels themselves had paused their breath. The faithful gathered at St. Peter's Square, some oblivious to what had transpired, others sensing in their hearts that something sacred had shifted in Rome. Within the College of Cardinals, a cold unease spread like a silent fog. Men of crimson robes exchanged glances, their faces trained in years of diplomatic restraint, but their hearts pounding beneath vestments woven with centuries of authority. For some, this was an unexpected blow. For others, those who had long whispered in secret chambers, it was the culmination of a plan carefully nurtured in shadows. How could it be that Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, once called the Asian Francis, the man whose very presence brought tears to the eyes of the poor, whose sermon stirred the hearts of millions, would suddenly find himself removed? Only months earlier, he was elevated, honored, called to place the papal ring upon Leo XIV's hand, a gesture seen by many as symbolic, perhaps even prophetic. And yet, prophecy has a language not easily understood by the hearts of men. Inside, the Apostolic Palace, behind the frescoed walls where saints and martyrs gazed eternally from painted heavens, whispers of an internal threat began to circulate. Some murmured of dossiers gathered by secret Vatican commissions, alleging divisions within the Church's future direction, questions of doctrine, of mercy, of tradition versus reform. Others spoke of old prophecies surfacing once again, warnings, written in cloisters centuries ago, hinting at a time when two great men would stand side by side, only for one to be separated by the wind of testing. And there were darker whispers still, that there had been visions, dreams, heavenly warnings delivered not only to mystics in distant lands, but to certain men within the Vatican itself. Visions of a time when the Church would face the hour of purification, when even the most beloved shepherds would be tested by fire. Pope Leo XIV had been under immense pressure. The burden of Peter's throne does not rest lightly upon mortal shoulders. He bore the weight of nations, the expectations of heaven, and the piercing eyes of a global church fractured between past and future. Behind the grandeur of the public masses, behind the triumphant hymns sung by choirs, there were forces wrestling unseen. Cardinals lobbying, diplomats pleading, factions forming, each believing they acted in defense of the one true faith. But Leo XIV knew something most did not. It was not only men he contended with. There had been signs, strange occurrences, silent warnings. Days before the decision, lightning struck the dome of St. Peter's, not once but twice, under a clear night sky. Monks in distant monasteries awoke in the dead of night from the same haunting dream. A cross fractured, a chalice overturned, a red bird falling from the heights. And there were letters, anonymous, urgent, delivered by unknown hands to the popes, private chambers, containing accusations, but also prophecies, some echoing words spoken long ago by Saint Malachy, whose chilling vision of the papal succession had resurfaced among Catholic faithful. Gloria Olivae, Petrus Romanus, and the time of judgment. Were these the ramblings of madmen, or divine warnings delivered through imperfect vessels? What terrified Leo XIV most was not the political implications, but the possibility that heaven itself was forcing his hand. Could Tagle, in his immense popularity and gentle spirit, become the unintended tool of division in this final hour? Could his rise risk fragmenting the unity of the Bride of Christ? Or worse, could unseen enemies, both spiritual and earthly, be planning to use Tagle's growing influence for purposes far more dangerous? The Pope wept bitterly as he prayed beneath Michelangelo's Pietà that night. Lord, "If this cup may pass from me," he whispered, echoing Gethsemane. But there was no answer, and so the decree was signed. In the hours that followed, the Vatican machinery moved swiftly and silently. Official communique released gentle language, speaking of reassignments, pastoral needs, greater service elsewhere. The official tone masked the gravity of the storm beneath. Around the world, the Catholic faithful responded, in waves of confusion and sorrow. In the Philippines, where Cardinal Tagle is deeply beloved, parishioners gathered by the tens of thousands, lifting rosaries toward heaven, many weeping openly. Some begged for clarity, others whispered of betrayal. In the streets of Manila, candles lined the cathedral steps like rivers of flickering stars. On social media, debates raged between those who saw the Pope's move as tragic and others who insisted it was an act of divinely inspired correction, a purging to protect the purity of doctrine before the approaching storm. Meanwhile, inside the Vatican, other eyes were watching. Certain cardinals, those who had long positioned themselves quietly in the chessboard of power, now moved their pieces. Ambitions awakened. Quiet alliances formed in the marble corridors, where only the sound of distant choirs echoed faintly. But far beyond the politics, above even the highest altars, unseen battles raged in the heavens. For this was no ordinary removal. This was the stirring of something ancient, something prophesied. And though Pope Leo XIV sat visibly calm before the world, in his private chapel, he now prayed more urgently than ever, for he knew the shaking had only just begun. The hour of testing had arrived, but the full mystery behind this unprecedented ousting was still unfolding. As dawn broke over Rome, casting golden rays upon the ancient stones of St. Peter's, the city carried an eerie calm. Pilgrims wandered the square, unaware that behind those towering columns, a storm unlike any in recent Vatican history was gathering. The global Catholic community was now fully awake to the unfolding drama. News agencies scrambled for statements. Commentators speculated wildly. Some spoke of personal conflict between Pope Leo XIV and Cardinal Tagle. Others whispered of forces beyond their comprehension, of ancient spiritual battles playing out beneath the surface. But within the deeper corridors of the Vatican, places where few even among the Curia have ever walked, there were meetings being held in total secrecy. They called it simply the Chamber. An inner circle of senior advisors, hand-picked by the Holy Father, gathered under the flickering light of oil lamps. Cell phones were confiscated, no transcripts allowed. Each man had sworn an oath of silence, not to protect politics, but to shield the faithful from panic. On the table before them lay ancient texts, sealed envelopes, and a dossier thicker than all others, marked Privatum Angelicum. Inside were not merely political documents, but spiritual warnings collected over generations, testimonies from mystics, reports from exorcists, records of apparitions both approved and suppressed, pages that spoke of coming trials for the Bride of Christ, of a church entering its final purification. And at the heart of these documents, the strange name that kept returning, Tagle. Not because of sin, not because of scandal, but because of something far more dangerous in these final hours of history. Potential. Tagle's charisma, his unprecedented global appeal, his unique position straddling both tradition and modernity, all combined into a fragile instrument which, if wielded, rightly could revive the Church, but if manipulated, could fracture it irreparably. The Holy Father had read the warnings again and again by candlelight. Visions of a divided Church, of a schism worse than the days of Avignon, of a false unity that appeared holy but concealed, the subtle hand of deception, of a counter-church rising, bearing all the external forms of Catholicism, but hollowed at its core. And yet, Leo XIV loved Tagle as a brother. The decision tore at his soul. Meanwhile, Rumors exploded across the global Catholic underground. Prophetic circles debated if this event was tied to the so-called midnight hour of Rome, foretold by certain stigmatics decades ago, a time when the successor of Peter would face betrayal not from without, but from within. In the Philippines, miraculous signs were now being reported. Multiple parishes claimed visions of the Virgin weeping tears of blood. In a remote chapel in Cavite, an elderly nun described seeing Saint Michael the Archangel standing guard at the tabernacle, his flaming sword drawn. Was heaven itself intervening? Were these authentic signs, or the hallucinations of grief-stricken? Faithful, the Church, bound by caution, offered no confirmation, but the people believed. Inside the Vatican's apostolic archive, long forbidden to most, ancient parchments were once again unsealed. Among them, fragments of a forgotten vision granted to Blessed Anna Maria Tagle over 2 centuries ago. The star shall fall, the dove shall rise, but the crown will tremble in the hand of him who sits upon Peter's throne. And in that hour, 2 shepherds shall be divided by my purifying flame, though neither shall understand fully. Many now asked, was the star Cardinal Tagle, the dove his symbol of peace? Was Leo XIV the trembling hand? The questions grew louder, and yet Pope Leo XIV remained silent. He spoke only to his confessor, an aged Jesuit who had served under 4 popes, whose face bore the quiet agony of one who knows too much. My son, the confessor whispered, gripping Leo's hands tightly. The purification was always destined to begin not among heretics, but within our own walls. This is the threshing floor. The wheat and tares are being separated. The Pope's eyes filled with tears. I fear, Leo whispered. I have begun something that I cannot stop. Outside, the spiritual battle intensified. In the very skies above Rome, a strange red hue appeared on the horizon at sunset, prompting thousands to kneel spontaneously, some praying, others weeping, others convinced that the warnings of Fatima had finally reached their hour. The world's attention now fully turned to the Vatican. Was this the beginning of the final? Sifting foretold by Our Lady? Was this the storm spoken of by St. John Paul II, a church destined to be stripped, purified, and made ready for the second coming of Christ? Or was it, as some darkly whispered, the first move of those long embedded within the Vatican's own walls, the so-called smoke of Satan that Paul VI had once spoken of with trembling lips? And at the center of it all stood 2 men, one seated upon the chair of Peter, the other now cast into an uncertain exile. The Catholic faithful held their breath. The spiritual realm stirred violently, and heaven watched, for the next move would determine whether this was the Church's great fall or her greatest hour of triumph. The night that followed was unlike any before. Rome itself seemed restless, as though the ground beneath its ancient streets trembled with the weight of what was unfolding. The statues of saints stood frozen, their marble eyes staring into the darkness, as if witnessing an invisible battle raging in the heavens above. Pope Leo XIV retired to his private chapel, alone, no guards, no aides. Before him stood only the Blessed Sacrament, exposed upon the golden monstrance. The flickering candlelight danced upon the Eucharist, like tongues of fire. He knelt, head bowed low, trembling. Lord, he whispered, if I have erred, show me now, before it is too late. The silence was unbearable. But then, the air shifted, the temperature dropped. A sudden breeze entered the locked chamber, swirling around him as though unseen wings had entered from beyond. Then it happened. A voice, not from without, but from within, clear, undeniable, resonating with both gentleness and unspeakable authority. The time has come, Peter. What you fear was never between men, but between thrones and dominions. Tears flooded the Pope's eyes, for in that moment he understood. This was never about Tagle. It was never merely a political move, nor a response to rumors or factions. What had unfolded was part of a far older battle, one stretching back to the very foundations of the Church, to the cosmic war between light and darkness that raged before time itself. Tagle's removal was necessary, not for punishment, but for protection. Because what few knew was this: Cardinal Tagle had become the chosen vessel for a greater role not within the walls of Rome, but outside them. Even as the Vatican reeled, Tagle had already been secretly relocated, not to obscurity, but to safety. Under special directive, a covert council of faithful servants had escorted him to a hidden sanctuary beneath the mountains of Lebanon, near the ancient monasteries, where monks still chant the divine office, as they have for centuries. For heaven had chosen him for a mission far beyond the Vatican. It was there that Tagle would receive an ancient manuscript, one kept, hidden for generations, known only to a handful of mystics and select pontiffs, Liber Angelorum Ultimae Horae, the Book of the Angels of the Final Hour. Contained within its fragile pages were revelations reserved only for the days of great trial, instructions on how the faithful remnant would endure the final tribulation prophesied by John in Revelation. For the Church was about to face not simply division, but an assault from powers so dark, so cunning that even many of the elect would be deceived. Pope Leo XIV now wept uncontrollably, not in despair, but in awe. The Lord had forced his hand not to destroy Tagle, but to preserve him for his true calling. And then, as the Holy Father remained prostrate before the Eucharist, the candles extinguished themselves one by one, leaving only the sacred host glowing with a light not of this world. And from the depths of that divine radiance, one final word was whispered into his soul: prepare. At that very same hour, as midnight struck, a great earthquake shook the grounds of St. Peter's Basilica. Not a destructive quake, but a sign. The obelisk in the square, which for centuries had stood immovable, trembled visibly for a moment, witnessed by astonished pilgrims. Around the world, many mystics simultaneously awoke from dreams of angels, descending upon the earth, their swords drawn, their wings ablaze. The Church was entering her greatest trial, and yet her greatest victory was drawing near. Few would have imagined that the supposed fall of Cardinal Tagle was, in fact, the activation of a hidden mission, one written in heaven before the foundations of the world, a move no one could have predicted, for what Satan meant for division, heaven turned into preparation. And in the coming storm, as Rome trembled and the world descended into greater darkness, a hidden remnant would rise, guided by men like Tagle, shielded by the prayers of the saints, and strengthened by the triumph of the Lamb. The final battle had not yet come, but the armies of heaven were already assembling, and all of history would soon know. The bride of Christ would not be defeated, the gates of hell would not prevail. Because what began as a scandal was heaven's secret plan all along.